Okay. Come on. Still loading.
No trouble.
Looks like we're up now. Okay. Hello, everyone. Give me just a second. I am going to share a screen again. Okay. So, hi. Uh, Hello, everyone. My name is Molly Porter. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Adult and Teen Services Librarian at the West Feliciana Parish Library in St. Francisville, Louisiana, as well as the current Game RT event programming co-chair. In particular, today, I am your host and tech team, and I am so happy to welcome you to the next installation of Game RT's webinar series, where today we will be discussing Ludoarsony and all of the wonderful things that come along with it. So with me, I have PS Berge. So please introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. As Molly said, I'm PS Berge. I'm a doctoral candidate at the University of Central Florida, and today we're going to be talking about burning games. I'm giving an extension of a talk I gave at Generation Analog earlier this year. We'll talk about setting games on fire and then also burning them, as in illicitly duplicating them. I'm really excited.
Wonderful, thank you. So a few quick notes. First, this event is being recorded. The recording will be available to GameRT members for 6 months before becoming publicly available on the GameRT website. We're also live streaming the session on Twitch. Hello, Twitch viewers. Twitch video on demand will also be accessible after the 6-month members only period. If you aren't following GameRT on Twitch already, please give us a follow so we can build up that channel, and the link will be in the chat soon. For anyone not previously familiar with GameRT, we are the Games and Gaming Roundtable of the American Library Association. Our mission is to promote gaming in libraries, whether it's programming, collection development, community building, prototyping, playtesting, or research. GameRT has 2 professional development series, a webinar series, this one, and a Learn and Play series. Before we start today's webinar, I want to let you know about some of our upcoming events. The first big event we have upcoming is our 2024 March mini conference. We would love to have you present in our mini conference. We would love to have you watch our mini conference. It's going to be a lot of fun. So we're back for another year. And the theme this year is building character. We welcome presentations on all aspects of character building, from character creation in tabletop role-playing games to character menus within video games to developing social and emotional learning skills through play and community. We are interested in presentations that connect character, both inside and outside of games, to libraries and community building, whether the focus is on readers advisory, collections, programming, or education. Proposals should explicitly state, I'm sorry, my screen is blocking it, the relevance to libraries, community building, but presenters don't need to be a librarian or a Game RT member to present. So please come and present for us. It's going to be so fabulous. The links are right here, but if you would like more information on this, feel free to reach out. I am happy to help. The next thing I am so excited to tell you about is the announcement of our Platinum Play Hall of Fame. So the Platinum Play Hall of Fame is for games that we as Game RT members feel would be fabulous additions to a library collection. We will be announcing our classics soon, and you can nominate games for our first round of Platinum Play winners now. We would love your nominations. You don't have to be a librarian to nominate. You don't have to be a Game RT member to nominate. We love all nominations, but we would especially love games that were published between the last 2 and 10 years. Yeah, again, I can give lots of information on that. I see someone in the chat. I will pop that out in just a moment. We have lots of fun events upcoming. We have a Shadow Dark stream that's going to be coming up. It's starting in January. That's going to be really great with one of our members named Carl DiNardo, who I'm pretty sure is here in our webinar chat. So lots of information for lots of things upcoming. And I know I just threw a lot at you, but stay with us. It's going to be fabulous today. So with that, I am going to turn it over to PS Berge, our fabulous webinar presenter today.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Molly. All right, I'm gonna share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see this. Yes? Okay. Excellent. I'm gonna move the chat over here so that I can see what folks are saying. Wonderful. Well, hi everyone. Once again, I'm PB. I'm a doctoral candidate at UCF, and today we're going to be talking about burning games in all senses of the word. And I am really excited to be back here at the Games and Gaming Roundtable. I was fortunate enough to give a talk here last year on Zine culture and queer game design communities in the tabletop space. You're welcome to check that out as you like. And if at any point during this talk you become interested in more of the things I'm discussing, the RT folks have put together a wonderful guide noting all the games and many of the books I'm citing here, and you can also find PDFs of all of my work on my website. So with that, today I'm going to be presenting some ongoing work that's a part of my dissertation, which is titled Unplayable Games, a Ludoarsonist manifesto on trans play and possibility in digital and analog gaming. This project builds from trans theory, critical media studies, and play studies to describe a practice that I call Ludoarsony, which focuses on how we can unravel game systems through play. So a quick overview. There are two ways that we might read Ludoarsony. First, it is to burn the game, to liberate play from fixed categories and from the game's own bounded materiality. We're going to talk about this a lot today, setting your games on fire. Yet it can also be read as Ludo arson, to play with fire, to find play in the burning, unmediating, and unmaking of games. So to broadly summarize, I am interested in play that makes a game no longer a game, that makes it what we might call the unplayable. We might take joy in the ash and burnt cardboard. We might become a new kind of player, become Ludo-arsonists. And for this talk today, I'm specifically going to share two small vignettes of my larger diss. In the first half, we're going to talk about burning games as in immolating them. Self-destructing games, immolation as play, world ending, and the play of being a doombringer. And then in the second half, we're going to talk about some new stuff I'm working on burning games as in proliferating them through emulation, creating legally dubious copies, cracked copies, ROM hacks, mimeographs and xeroxes, mods and ports, and the play of being a bad copy. So with that, I have bad news. The end of gaming is upon us. And to be fair, this is far from the first time. Gaming, it seems, is always ending, and gamers are always mourning its loss. Casualization, the rise of mobile games, DRM software, the satanic panic, microtransactions, Fortnite, inflation, scapegoating for gun violence, emulation, loot boxes, and of course, Gamergate. We might lose count of all the times that gaming has met its tumultuous end. And Catherine Cross, in her excellent analysis of Gamergate, describes the gamer's disposition towards melodramatic doomsaying and existential panic as a terror dream. As she writes, gamer love must be a reactive thing, forever under outside threat. Protecting against these threats or opposing them has become part of the very practice of being a gamer. And this is not unique to video games. Last year in my Zine culture talk at Games and Gaming, I discussed reactionary movements within the D&D fandom and how the son of the so-called father of D&D, Ernie Gygax, provoked a wave of toxic messaging after making claims that old school players were being run out of tables for being old-fashioned and not understanding gender identity. And Gygax's bitter lamentations, his faux reluctant defensiveness, his fantastical nostalgia are all part and parcel of the terror dream of gaming. Such is the tragedy of the capital G gamer, a life of bitter, grim-faced vigilance against the swirling threat of the inevitable. But maybe, just maybe, the end of gaming isn't a bad thing. Several months ago, popular gaming magazine Polygon tweeted an article with the tagline, "The opposite of grimdark is hope punk, and tabletop RPGs are leading the way to a more optimistic future for the hobby and humanity." And in response to the article, however, Brazilian TRPG designer Wendy Yu created a thread of frustrations about her game's inclusion under the label of hope punk. Yu noted that this was a mischaracterization of their work, as what is often described as hope punk plays into a bourgeois escapist fantasy that trades an actual understanding of our context for an empty vibe of wholesomeness, tenderness, kindness, and shit like that. As she went on to argue, we don't need hope punk's type of hope in our grimdark times. We need to burn the world down because we hope whatever we build in the ashes is not just a rehash of what came before. That's what my game is about. The end of the world is a good thing, the beginning of something else. Now, what you describes here is a sharp articulation of what gender radical and abolitionist feminists have been saying for some time. First is that hope is a promissory techno-utopian tool that encourages somnolence and ignores material conditions. Trans scholars, for example, have pointed out that the "it gets better" narrative used by gay suicide prevention charities circumvents the reality that it only gets better for some, and its passivity suggests that one might wait patiently for this always oncoming betterment. Instead, feminist scholars have articulated experiences of an active longing that is also an ushering in of the world after this one. So, our question then becomes, how do we find, as Malatino writes, a way of making space to think, to be in worlds that are unlivable, but that one must nevertheless persist within? This is the project of my work here, to find play in the unplayable, that we might find life in the unlivable. If reactionary gaming fandoms are rife with doomsayers, then the Ludoarsonist might be called the doombringer. The Ludoarsonist not only embraces but ushers in the end, unsealing the seals, sparking the fire, pressing every big red button that might hurry this thing along until it's all ablaze. Marquise Bay argues that taking hold of the world through the dictates of Black trans feminism in effect ends the world in order to claim the world, a world emerging from the rubble of this world anew in order for something that used to be us to live. The Ludo-arsonist seeks the end of gaming for the same reasons they seek the end of gender, to liberate play from the grip of these twin phantoms. Their feminist position comes from their role as a celebrant of the apocalypse. So with that, let's find our matches. I first started studying burning games over a year ago when I was working on a paper about the Morkborg Zine community, something I talked about a little bit last year. For those who don't know, Morkborg is a Swedish death punk role-playing game that takes place in a despairing sludge metal dystopia. But what I'm interested in is its unique endgame mechanic. In Morkborg, every dawn the players roll to see if the world draws closer to its inevitable end. Anytime a 1 is rolled, a new prophetic misery of the apocalypse is unleashed upon the earth. When the 7th misery is rolled, the world ends, all the characters die, the game and your lives end here, burn the book. And that might be read as hyperbole, but it isn't. Fans frequently share photos of videos of the burning text. And as I wrote last year, while this might seem like a marketing scheme to get folks to buy more copies of the book, the ritualistic burning of the Morkborg text can actually be read as a political act. Dungeon crawler tabletop games in fantasy genres, especially those in D&D's ludic genealogy, are often associated with costly books and rules lawyering. But Morkborg playfully diminishes the significance of its own rules by inviting players to set it on fire. What happens when a game is made unplayable through burning, when the material reality, the coded nature, the textness, the authority, and the binding propensity of the ludic system is unraveled through burning? The game isn't gaming anymore when it's been burned away, but play lingers amidst the fire. Play is the fire. Let's turn to another example. Stephen Dewey's tragic horror game 10 Candles is its own take on ludoarsony, as it is a game that one plays by burning. I try to run it for friends once a year around Halloween. We sit in a dark room around a flame-proof bowl and the titular 10 candles. This time around, I'm facilitating one of the book's classic scenarios. Characters have been hiding in a small bunker and decide to venture to an observatory in rural Oregon where they last heard of other survivors. Before the game begins, I pass my phone around to my players, who take turns recording in-character messages about setting out. In 10 Candles, characters are made by writing their traits down on note cards and burning away these features to alter the fiction. The game consists of 10 scenes, the next scene beginning whenever a candle goes out. 10 Candles facilitates a deliberate playing into darkness. As the story becomes increasingly grim, as characters come to face their inevitable ends, and players know from the get-go that their characters will die. In fact, this is one of the rules Dewey is relatively hard-fisted about. It's not about whether the characters fall to the darkness or emerge as survivors. There are no survivors. Not here. Everyone will die in the final scene, without question or quarrel. 10 Candles guides players towards the moment after the game is over. At the start of each scene, as the game master, I lead players in a ritual. I begin, "These things are true. The world is dark," and the players take turns going around and setting truths about the scene before responding together, "And we are alive." We play out the scenes of the characters' misadventure. Eventually, they make their way to the observatory and break inside to find it empty, but not entirely empty. And as the final candle flickers on the table, all of us know exactly what's about to happen. One player immediately dramatically sacrifices her character to save another survivor, granting that player a hope die. Another of my players is still trying to problem solve his way out of the inevitable. In the end, the survivor who received the hope die is the last one alive. She tries to hide and fails her role, and as the last candle is snuffed and she perishes, the room falls into darkness. I then say my part, "These things are true. The world is dark." This time, there is no speaking back. There are no truths. Instead, I discreetly press play on my phone and begin the recording. The voices of these characters, now lost to us, their virtues and vices and moments and brinks burnt to ash in a bowl on the table in my friend's living room, play again.
This is Gregory Bly. December 22nd, 2019. Results have been inconclusive at this station, and we're beginning to run out of resources. It's been decided that we'll move on, God knows where. I hope it'll make a difference. Maybe. This is stupid. I'm done.
I think we might be the last ones. The very last ones. And I don't want that to be true, so if you're listening to this, we tried.
The recorded voices are at once familiar and not. We hear these characters and know that they are not the same as they were when these messages were captured, nor are we the same players. And as the recording ends the game, 10 Candles is over. And a radical, devastating play, the sitting together in the darkness of it, erupts from the ashes. The unspoken words, "and we are alive," linger in the smoky air unuttered. As Dewey states in the guidebook, let them have that silence. This is the moment that 10 Candles is all about. We sit in the moment after. The characters are dead, the story is done, and what we are left with is ash and the dark. The silence hangs over us until one of my friends shakes their head and says, "Well, fuck, what should we play now?" Both 10 Candles and Morkborg then represent burning games as a means of playing with the end. They invite a mournful reveling in the destruction, in the anticipation of the unmaking, morose and gleeful, as players cast their characters piece by piece into fire and post videos of their burning sourcebooks. This celebratory knowing that the burning is coming marks an orientation towards unending play. To quote Bay again, "So burn it all, there's the gender we want." Well, here I say, burn it all. There's the game we want. At the end of the burned game, what we have left is the play, momentarily gameless, of sitting in the quiet dark together, feeling things together, holding and witnessing each other. This isn't hope punk, this is Ludoarsony. And as the final words of the final psalm of Morkborg's nameless scriptures intone, all praise the fire which burns all, and the darkness shall swallow the darkness. There's an emerging genre of Doom games that are taking shape within queer tabletop spaces. Ten Candles and Morkborg are only a reflection of this idea, playing into the unplayable. Magpie Games' award-winning title Bluebeard's Bride, based on the folktale, puts the players in the role of controlling a single doomed bride who will die at the hands of her husband at the end of the game. I've also written previously about Ray Najadi's Apocalypse Keys, in which the players are monster agents working for the government. As these monster agents grow more powerful, they eventually fall to their own ruin and become themselves harbingers of the apocalypse. One by one, the PCs become the big bad villain of the next season. But even when the characters and their worlds are done, there's other ways to play as we linger in the game after. We are playing Everest Pipkin's world-ending game. Several of us are moving soon and our schedules are misaligning, so it's time for the game to end. Thankfully, Pipkin's book features a handful of apocalypses by which to doom an ongoing campaign. Some are somber, as in Take the Fall, which prompts one player to martyr themselves, while others, like Anime Music Video, are lighthearted, prompting players to tell the stories to music. Across each ending, the GM becomes no longer the game master, but the director, as they and the players adjust the proverbial camera angles of these scenes as they happen. Players likewise are invited to step out of role-playing individual characters and work with the director to command the videography of the game's conclusion. World Ending Game is a celebration of the cinema of the end, a playground of destruction and fade to black moments. In playing World Ending Game, we perform a sad and beautiful movement, stepping outside of the world as it is ending. Are we still playing the game as we film its unmaking? Perhaps we are playing something new as we take our places behind the cameras. Another example. We are playing Eden's The World is Ending and We Are Very Large Dogs, a $1 game from itch.io. As the premise of the introduction states, it is too late to stop it. It cannot be slowed down anymore, especially not by you, because you are just a group of large dogs. Helpless to do much ourselves, our role is observational. We note with grim solemnity and playful innocence the poetic moments of the end. Incidentally, Large Dogs is one of an abundance of dog-based Doom games. Dogs in the Bark and Kennels of Carnage both illustrate this trend. Becoming a dog at the end of the world represents many ends at once: the end of the game, the end of the human, the end of agential control. I am fascinated by this abundance of doggish Doom games, a genre clearly inspired by post-apocalyptic dog media like I Am Legend and Isle of Dogs. Bo Ruberg has written about such post-human apocalypses in their study of San Andreas Deer Cam, a Twitch live stream of an AI-controlled deer in Grand Theft Auto. Ruberg argues that San Andreas Deer Cam strips the world of any agency, or rather any space for human play, and as such represents a movement into the apocalypse that is the unplayable. They write, we would do well to understand the piece as offering not so much a vision of the post-apocalypse in video games as a vision of the post-apocalypse of video games. If video games are a medium defined by agency, this is agency's end. Large Dogs is similarly a post-human vision of the post-apocalypse. Much like World Ending Game and the Spectator of San Andreas Deer Cam, there is nothing left to do but watch. Our role as the player is dramatically ejected amid a rupturing of the game as an ontological category. Yet there is playfulness in watching, in observing the burning from afar. At the end of the game, we become something else, cameras and animals, witnesses. We slip out of ourselves and revel in the gameless possibility of standing beside our own coffins and filming the world on fire. This is play which stems from watching and longing, to be alive amidst an infinite death. Because when the characters are gone and the game is over, what we hope for is to still be playing in the ashes and livable rubble of whatever comes when this playground stops smoldering. What we hope to find is life, to find play beyond the end, a forever living, forever playing. This isn't hope in the sense of hope punk. I am referring to a hope that becomes an incendiary ushering forth of the coming fire, a hope that is also a becoming, dogs and fire, ruinous harbingers, the end. But speaking of wishes, there's one thing I want to leave you with from this first chapter. There's a practice I'm fond of in role-playing games, stars and wishes, a role-playing ritual that belongs to no one game, though many make use of it. The premise is that at the end of each session of play, each player grants a star to another player, shouting out a moment they really enjoyed. And each player makes a wish, something they hope to see in a future session. I bring up stars and wishes to highlight a practice made exemplary in role-playing games, taking time when the game is over to slip into the meta and become, for a moment, people observing and longing together. While stars and wishes is regarded as a safety tool and might be seen as merely facilitatory, granting stars and making wishes is also play, a kind of aftercare in Hill Malatino's sense. We might imagine it and the practices I've articulated here of burning games and welcoming the end as ways of doing after-world care, small hints at how we might keep living and playing in the world ablaze. Okay, I'm going to take a quick drink of water. Now that we have talked about burning games in the context of setting them on fire, I'm going to pivot and talk about another way we might burn games, by emulating them. Gray market games, ROM hacks, and knockoffs all extend the Ludoarsonist toolkit. While the goal here is less literally destructive, the act of cracking, burning, and decompiling games to be redistributed, retrofitted, and future fitted is another means by which the materiality of the game is ruptured for the sake of play. In the context of games and media platforms, emulation represents a technical process by which one system imitates the architecture or behavior of another system. Emulation is also deeply implicated in the post-apocalypse of gaming. Depending on one's disposition, emulation is either perceived as the savior of gaming or, to corporations and publishers, a source of theft, ruin, and corruption. Burning a game in these ways abrogates the game to extend the possibility of play. That is, it unplays. Let's begin with a cursory overview of emulation as a play practice and the technology of emulators. It's easy to misunderstand emulation as a process of copying or recreating the reference system, yet emulation is an imprecise art and is not synonymous with duplication. On the technical level, emulating involves a recursive process of decompilation. At once, there is a cracking, tearing down, and ripping as the reference system is exploded into navigable assets and functions. Then comes a process of building a new system, which may or may not imitate the specific computational or aesthetic dynamics of the referent. In gaming contexts, the most popular emulators are those which make console-specific software playable on PC, such as Dolphin, which emulates GameCube and Wii games, Zemu for Xbox, and even official emulators like Nintendo's Virtual Consoles. These programs are designed to mirror through software the architecture and console circuitry and run ripped versions of these game files. So without getting too into the weeds, emulators vary between what are called low-level emulators, which are concerned with imitating the precise clock cycles and logical circuitry of the console, and high-level emulators, which are less concerned with the precision and more so playability. For speedrunners, for example, who rely on frame-perfect inputs and need runs to be competitively comparable for timings, using low-level and cycle-accurate emulators is important. Likewise, hardware emulators or reproduction consoles use hardware like field programmable gate array chips, say that 5 times fast, to replicate the circuitry of the reference system. But again, most emulators aren't concerned with imitating precise clock speeds, but making play accessible. Examples of this include multiple arcade machine emulators, or MAME cabinets. These are computers set up to look like classic machines that are capable of emulating thousands of classic games. Importantly, emulators vary in how close they may imitate a reference system, and some imitate no specific system at all. There are, and this is the coolest thing in the world, dozens of fantasy consoles, which are systems that emulate hypothetical consoles. For example, you can make games for the Pico 8, which emulates the hardware of a console that has never existed. Instead, designing games for the Pico 8 is all about working around arbitrary hardware limitations to make tiny retro games. Reproduction and fantasy consoles alike represent the ways that emulators collapse clear genealogies of technology. At one point, one might ask, are you just rebuilding a Nintendo 64? How can one emulate a fantasy system that never existed? Game emulators fluctuate in their proximity to reference systems, and the lines between imitation and original blur, often and spectacularly. Now, although emulation is crucial to the proliferation of play, emulation is seen as a threat to gaming, the threat of the bad copy. I want to highlight a recent and particularly telling event that transpired in April of 2023 on Twitter. A few weeks before the much anticipated launch of The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, fans online discovered that a promotional video for the game, posted by Nintendo's official Legend of Zelda account in Japan, had been removed due to a copyright strike. Strange, but what really surprised everyone was who the copyright strike was issued by. I'm curious if anybody knows this, by the way, in the chat. Does anyone know who struck Nintendo's video here? Give it a second. I'm going to take that as no one has any idea. Yep, exactly. You got it, George. Nintendo. Nintendo struck their own video in a moment in which parody truly became reality. Nintendo issued a copyright strike and had its own official content removed. And fans on Twitter began widely circulating links and images to this post, pointing out this bizarre moment of legal self-infliction. One user wrote very eloquently, "The takedown is coming from inside the house." And this moment is hilarious, but it is also contextualized by Nintendo's long history of legal aggression regarding modification of its games. This moment transpired amidst an especially aggressive DMCA blitz by Nintendo directed at fan-made content. In April, dozens of YouTubers, Twitch streamers, modders, and speedrunners had found their gaming content struck across the web as they were served claims by Nintendo. Popular Zelda challenge runner and streamer Point Crow posted a video to YouTube publicizing his ongoing tension and impending legal conflict with Nintendo. Point Crow showed that 24 of his videos had been removed by Nintendo, and he received 2 copyright strikes against his YouTube channel. The issue, he claimed, concerned his facilitation of fan-made mods for popular Switch game Breath of the Wild. Point Crow had previously paid modders to develop a multiplayer mod for Breath of the Wild, which they had released in 2022. Nintendo's case here was that modifications of its games must be done on emulator or a hacked console, and therefore any videos containing emulated gameplay are illegal per Nintendo's terms of service. And while creators had been posting videos featuring Breath of the Wild multiplayer for several months without issue, the reaction from Nintendo came unexpectedly in April, issuing DMCA challenges to every video uploaded by content creators which featured any reference to modded content, and many that did not. See, speedrunners who regularly rely on glitches also had their videos removed. Even reaction videos to Tears of the Kingdom trailers were removed. And yes, Nintendo's own official post also became collateral damage. A lot of this came down to Nintendo being fundamentally unable to delineate what content was being played on bad copies. To illustrate this point, we're going to play a brief game right here and now. I have here several screenshots of Breath of the Wild gameplay videos. Pretend you are Nintendo. Can you tell me which of these are modded? Some of these are easier than others. I'd love to have your guesses in the chat. Yes. Clothes, definitely. I will tell you, bottom left. And yes, also bottom right. No, Woody is not in the original Breath of the Wild. Um, Precisely. Well, you guys have eagle eyes. You're actually way better at this than Nintendo is. So, I'd start submitting job applications now. Um, the bottom two are modded content, but the rest of these are all possible glitches on unmodified hardware, including VR mode, duplication glitches, moon jumping, and what's called a bow lift smuggling slide, or bless, within the game. And Nintendo's techno-legal strong-arming is indicative of its reactionary position to any modification of its software and hardware. Manipulating a Zelda game requires no external hardware, no modification of game files. Any speedrunner will tell you the game is fundamentally broken, and you can get away with a lot. But all of these glitches were still targeted by Nintendo's DMCA takedowns, despite being performed on original hardware. Apparently, some users were punished for playing a little too hard. Even the mere threat of emulation triggers the paranoia of gaming institutions. Towing the line becomes crossing it. The boundaries become unrecognizable even to the enforcers. Now, Nintendo's antagonism here follows a broader pattern in gaming culture. Over the past several years, gaming institutions have repeatedly perpetuated anti-player and anti-play practices. At SCMS last year, I talked about Wizards of the Coast and their attempts to repeal and replace the open gaming license as they sought to expand their control over third-party content. Not to mention sending Pinkerton agents to the home of a YouTuber who acquired copies of Magic cards a few weeks too early. Likewise, game engine Unity recently tried to move to a verified installation system that would have crushed developers, and Steam continues to crack down on so-called fake games, despite the fact that their policies have meant that award-winning indie titles were erroneously removed and penalized. Gaming institutions are migrating towards platform economy models. We watch record-breaking profits amid industry-wide layoffs and union-busting practices. The reactionary positions of these companies stem from their capitalist investments in maintaining games as what Stephanie Bullock and Patrick Lemieux call black box commodity fetishes. They write that these institutions promote a standard metagame that assumes that video games should be executed on approved hardware platforms, displayed at certain specified frame rates in accordance with video standards, interfaced with through official and unmodified controllers, experienced by a normative, binocular, bidextrous, bipedal body, and completed according to their intended design. But emulation as a practice destabilizes the standard metagame and threatens this entire ontology of original, authentic, and approved ways to play. What becomes of games that have been modded, cracked, homebrewed, ported, and fangame? Emulation represents a profoundly anti-capitalist threat to capital G gaming and its institutions. Despite Nintendo's crackdowns within player communities, emulated and modded versions of Nintendo games are crucial to how players play. Right now, Pokemon Emerald Rogue, a ROM hack by Abby Potter that turns the game into a brutal roguelike, is one of the most popular versions of the game. At the same time, many scholars and archivists have documented the ways that Project M, a modified version of Super Smash Bros. Brawl, is the most popular version in many competitive scenes. The increased popularity of these fan games, however, comes at a time when first-party and retail, what some might call authentic, versions of these classic Nintendo games have become increasingly inaccessible. Retro gaming is an expensive hobby, with prices for classic games skyrocketing by double-digit percentiles every year. A few painful examples: Game Boy and Game Boy Advance cartridges, many of which no longer work due to failing internal batteries, cost between $60 and $2,000 on online markets. And Nintendo 64 cartridges can cost anywhere between $90 and over $200 US. Even more pressing, in March of 2023, the eShops for both the Wii U and Nintendo 3DS were closed, leaving many digitally exclusive games entirely non-acquirable on approved platforms. Following the announcement of the eShop closures, Nintendo responded to fan concerns by noting that they would occasionally make their own official remasters and ports available through the Nintendo Switch's online classic library, but that we currently have no plans to offer classic content in other ways. With this brief overview of emulation, then, I want to transition to a few quick takeaways for us, the aspiring Ludoarsonists, to be thinking about in regard to how emulation can reframe our understanding of games and play. Number one, emulators have their own goals. The first question that one should ask of an emulated system is not simply, what is this system emulating, but also, what is this emulator in itself for? Emulators can extend the accessibility of play through translation patches, color swaps, modding, alternative controls and controllers, greater hardware support, availability, and affordability. And at the same time, emulated games can be optimized for competitive reasons, such as internal metrics and monitoring, creating and loading save states, improved netcode for online play, fixing randomness, rebalancing, integrating with recording software, and playing new metagames and challenges like randomizers and Kaizo. By the same token, discussions of how faithful emulators are risk erroneously moralizing the reference system. Rayford Gins in Game After discusses this issue at length, noting how many conservators seek to restore old arcade cabinets and coin-op video games using only original hardware, while other curators and collectors will happily gut old arcade machines and convert them into MAME cabinets capable of running hundreds of arcade games. But these approaches differ in their goals. One represents a preservationist urge, one that perhaps teeters on nostalgic conservatism or puritanism to maintain a specific haptic and aesthetic tradition, while the other is about making as many games as possible available to players. Ultimately, emulators should not be evaluated as bad or good based on how closely they adhere to these traditions. Rather, we ought to recognize and explore how emulators themselves are designed for the purposes of reshaping play. Second, emulators trouble the fantasy of the game commodity. By decompiling and making visible the intricacies of reference systems, emulators reveal that any original hardware is itself idiosyncratic. Devices localized for different regions, discrete updates and versions, and third-party productions all serve as reminders that what is being emulated is in itself a generalized, idealized, or otherwise abbreviated understanding of the game system. For example, a game I loved in my youth, Shrek 2 the video game, has 7 discrete versions across different platforms. Emulating games requires an understanding of this branching genealogy and decisions on which versions or which aspects of said versions one wants to play. Emulating, reversing, and reproducing game objects fundamentally unravels fantasies of game commodity. To quote Gins on this idea, preservation questions the very ontology of the video game. The common question, what is it, somewhat explodes when we must discern the significant properties of a game to determine what ought to be preserved to still be the game. When writing emulation, we quickly learn that the game is never singular, but a complex object, a cultural accretion of technologies. It's also worth noting that emulators, like all game technologies, are technically complex and often imprecise. Imitating the functions of hardware through software is a computationally difficult task, and emulators, as software maintained by volunteers, are prone to bugs and glitches. In my own experience with emulators, I've run into no shortage of issues, including games running at 2 frames per second, games losing all collisions and sending me falling through the floor, and games glitching so badly my character is just a floating head. But where game technologies seek to patch out, hotfix, and hide the jank, emulation and its adjacent practices expose and revel in all the jankiness inherent to game technologies. Emulators deliberately reproduce both terrible games and the terribleness of games and create space for play in its ceaseless tinkering. Briefly, also, emulators are maintained by communities. Within gaming subcommunities specifically, most emulators are free, open source tools developed by enthusiasts. And while community-maintained emulators represent a reopening of play and a movement towards cooperative media platforms, emulators generally arise only through unpaid or underpaid efforts of volunteers and are subject to abandonment, deprecation, infighting, and all the hurdles that come with maintaining open source software. Ironically, these volunteers emulators are uncompensated even as full-priced remasters struggle to compete with emulated versions of these same games. There's no shortage of examples of poor-performing releases which failed to stand up to pre-existing emulations, from the buggy Last of Us Part 1 remaster to the Sonic Colors Ultimate release, which created such aggressive visual bugs that the Sonic community had to circulate seizure risk warnings. It's important to recognize both the precarity and possibility of community-maintained technologies, which are at once vulnerable to legal violence and financial drain, even while helping us challenge the interests of multi-billion-dollar gaming institutions, and, as James Muldoon writes in Platform Socialism, imagine possible futures that they do not control. And finally, emulation is itself a kind of play. While one might be tempted to think that emulation is a complex labor that exists only prepositionally to produce play, emulation is itself a playful act, as described by numerous gaming subcommunities. In The Beginner's Guide to Reverse Engineering Retro Games, hosted on Retro Reversing, they write that when a game is reverse engineered, it becomes open to new life, new levels, sounds, and more hours of fun. Reversing is like a game inside the game. When you have finished playing the game, and the fun of reversing can begin. Emulation is the play of dismantling and building game systems from the ashes of the old. Developers and technologists in the project of cracking and emulating games offer a glimpse of platform cooperatives and user ownership of digital tools of design. Emulation as a Ludoarsonist practice reveals the mutability of technology and the ways that black box techno-fetishism can be collapsed through play. In the full chapter, I have here an entire section dedicated to how emulation emerges out of early internet culture, shareware, and Zine movements. The real point here is that despite the modern fetishization of the video game object, there can be no true originals. While we have come to reductively understand games as bound ludic and material commodities, the games we play are always being duplicated and remade. As Nathan Altice writes, when we pay attention to the worldwide scope of platform adoption, the ebb of flow of cycles through cloning and emulation, we find that generational metaphors collapse. So, through emulation, the game becomes not a bound product or static system, but whatever we want to play. While we have been conditioned to see games as existing only within the purview of a black box commodity fetish, emulation, modding, and hacking games are all ways of playing that both extend the possibilities for play and are in themselves playful. If we're to understand play as free movement in the context of rigid systems, then the process of decompiling, building, and moving within the interstices of hardware and software is necessarily also play. A reminder that there are ways of playing that rupture our very understanding of the game as a capitalist and ontological category. It is a play that ruptures the game, not through fire, but through explosive tinkering and creativity. And to tie this all back together, we must continue to explore burning games, both immolating them and emulating them, as a practice that does not reify or destroy games, but rather upends gameness itself for the sake of play. So in conclusion, set your games on fire. Play until the game falls apart. Make new games from the ashes of the old. This is the play the Ludoarsonist is after. This is why the game and its attending logics, its bits of wood and cardboard and plastic, its collateral technocultural encampments, and its corporocratic institutions all must burn. Gaming's defensiveness, its terror dream, imagines that play stops when the game stops. But this is a lie. The end of gaming is here, and when it's all been burned and the game is truly over and these fires clear, we'll still be here, under the stars, playing and wishing and living for the world we might make in the ashes of the game after. Play that holds our words, unuttered in the air and mutual assurance, and we are alive. Thank you all so much for listening. Here is my email and Discord handle. I am so happy to talk about any of these things and am looking forward to any questions that we might have. I hope I didn't go too over.
No, that was fabulous. I have chills. That
Oh,
was
yay.
so good. Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna stop.
Perfect. I am going to open up Q&A now. I am looking for your questions. If you have them in the Zoom, please do use the Q&A function instead of putting them in the chat. I am also monitoring the Twitch chat. So if you're watching on Twitch and you have questions, by all means, let me know and I will relay them.
Sounds great.
And yeah, I mean, I have plenty of things that I could ask, but I'm going to tamper that
sounds
for the
great.
moment because
Also, just to quickly address a couple things that came up in the comments, Lauren, precisely, in many cases, the list of games that are completely inaccessible outside of the work of enthusiasts only gets longer and longer. And similarly, Hannah, yes, exactly. This was definitely like, I know Wizards of the Coast gets a rep for anti-player practices, but this was truly a cinematic moment of like twirling your mustache in an evil way for them to send Pinkerton agents for something that ultimately ended up being largely their fault.
for sure. Looking back, because there were some comments in the chat on Twitch earlier.
Oh, great. Also,
Let's
hello,
see.
Twitch.
I know that Jesse is wondering in the Twitch chat how the Morkborg book thematically addresses the destruction of the book through burning.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. So, this is very apropos for how the game approaches play in general. For context, the characters that you create in Morkborg are not intended to be long-lived. You can roll characters that have all negative stats, that have a single hit point. There are enemies in the game that can just kill you outright, and it is meant to sort of simulate this OSR note card style play of like, here's my scribbled character, we'll see if I survive today. But on the material end, the game itself is gorgeous. I here actually. I have one of my copies, one that was not burned. It's got a glow-in-the-dark spine. It's got like foil, like gorgeous glowing on the internal pages. It's a beautiful book. And so setting it on fire is very much kind of sacrilegious, but that's not the only way that players are encouraged to kind of mutilate the book. There's also a table at one point. I can't find it off the top of my head, of course. Here we go, where you are supposed to throw a knife at this page to select the options. So
That's amazing.
by the time you have finished a game of Morkborg, your book might already be fairly mutilated, and so burning it then becomes kind of a celebratory move.
Yeah, and I love the idea of, the creation through the destruction
Yeah,
as part of this gaming process.
definitely.
And let me see.
And as an artifact of play, I'll just briefly mention Jay Dragon's incredible game, Yaziba's Bread and Breakfast.
Yes.
I was just thinking, yes, sticker games, exactly. There's a whole contingency of games that are sort of borrowing from exit games and these other like single use there's a word for this. Games like Charterstone. I'm blinking. I'm sorry. I was just
Do you mean
talking for
like
45
legacy
minutes.
games
Legacy
or
games. Thank you.
got it?
Exactly. Where you could really only play the thing once. But those are being applied to RPG source books that are hundreds of pages long. In the case of Yaziba's Bed and Breakfast, yeah, you get stickers and like you're tearing pages out and like making permanent decisions about the state of the book. But in that way, it becomes an artifact of play. Yeah.
For sure. And Jesse also mentioned in the Twitch chat that they find it so interesting that the first two big legacy games were Risk and Pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And that these are games that are also dealing with those themes of death and destruction and, how that works.
Absolutely.
So we do have a question here from Carl DiNardo. Carl says, I love the design direction towards legacy board games that lean into component destruction and modification, but there are a lot of people who have a big distaste for it, citing replayability and so on. You touched on this with RPGs. Do you have any thoughts about this?
Yes, absolutely. I think that a lot of this, and I've been coming up against this a lot in discussions of games like Morkborg, with folks who like to treat game objects as being very precious. right? We fill our shelves with them, and the idea of having the game there in the box, untouched, unmutilated, becomes in itself so important to this like conservationist collector urge. But I'm really interested in what happens when we disentangle game as a commodity from play as an experience, right? And so games that encourage their own destruction. And there's a long legacy of this that extends well beyond legacy games themselves, right? There's a whole host of video games that do this now, self-deleters, where when you finish the game, it says, tee, I'm going to delete myself off the hard drive now, and you can never play it the same way again. And I actually think those can be, especially when it's, you know, resonant with the themes and narrative of the work itself, incredibly evocative, because what it does is it encourages an induplicable play experience. And that's the thing I think is really important with games like 10 Candles, for example. By the time you're done with a game of 10 Candles, those characters have been burned. All you have left is the recording. And you could sit down with those same players and the same book and try to have a similar experience, but the game 10 Candles can never be replicated in exactly the same way again. And that's precisely the point. And so I think that's true of RPGs. I also think that's true of board games, games that are meant to facilitate a really rich play experience between the folks who are present. That doesn't necessarily translate into having a persistent, you know, game commodity on your shelf that you can take off and do the same thing every time. Yeah, I think it's actually a really important and rich movement. There is, of course, things to be said about teehee, now you have to buy this again if you want to play. But that's a whole nother conversation. Yeah,
Right, yeah.
of course.
Let's see, we have a question. First, I need to correct myself. It wasn't Jesse in chat, it was Mackenzie.
Oh, well, thank you,
Mackenzie. All right, so Mackenzie has a question. Especially with your wordplay, Ludoarson and immolation and emulation, how much are these concepts tracing back to Wittgenstein?
Not at all. Question mark.
Okay.
If there's a specific connection you're interested in there, I'd be really curious. I might be like missing a key important reference here. Foggy morning brain. But yeah,
No, you're fine.
Not
I
directly.
also do not know.
Okay. Yeah, I can just say the term emerged sort of as a gag, almost at Generation Analog. In response to a Q&A, actually, I said I was coming to see myself as a kind of Ludoarsonist, and ended up teasing that apart theoretically and being really interested in this idea of larceny, theft, and also burning play and play of burning. And that became a fusion, and people like it. So we're
because
here.
It's fabulous.
Yes. Thank you.
Danielle says, I like very much centering the importance of play rather than the importance of play objects with the burning.
No, I feel that way very strongly, especially in a time where game objects are becoming really expensive, and we see this a lot in emerging metagame practices. For example, I play, as you can see, Magic the Gathering, which if you play paper Magic can become incredibly expensive and very exclusionary, but also proxies exist. And there's this whole contention around, oh, those are fake cards. And it's like, really? Well, like if I'm playing with my friends, this is the only way I can play this card that costs $2,000 if I were to buy it somewhere else. So like, what is your goal? Like, and I think that's important to ask ourselves as scholars and curators too.
Let's see.
Heck yeah. I love that, Hannah.
Let's see.
Yeah.
Mackenzie says, Wittgenstein developed this philosophical game theory concept of language games and whatnot. I'm not a philosopher, so I can only speak to a certain degree, but I researched him for a game-related paper once upon a time. So I think that's where
that's great.
That's coming from.
Yeah, well, thanks, Mackenzie. I'll follow up on that.
Okay. Couple of minutes left, so time for more questions if people have them. I will also say, because I think there's time for me to sneak one of my own.
Yeah,
And,
of course.
you know, um, first off, and I know from the chat that Danielle feels the same way, so many of those lines are just like, I was like writing them down like, this is perfection, you know?
Oh,
So
thank you.
it's really good. But
Mm.
I am thinking about, specifically when you were talking about the existing in that infinite death and play as part of that, um, that maybe playing these games through those experiences can be kind of a catharsis. Um,
Yeah.
and I was just wondering, I don't know, what your thoughts are on that, or if you, well, especially with a game like Tin Candles,
Yeah.
where that moment I think can feel really cathartic.
Hmm.
Um, Maybe, I don't know how that plays
Yeah.
in.
No, definitely. So in the dissertation chapter that this is based around, actually there is a whole second half to that line of thought, specifically talking about Trans Day of Remembrance, which it's the whole segment there is sad and a little dark, and it is part of the reason why I didn't bring it up in this talk,
Hey, yeah, for sure.
in particular. But one of the things I'm really interested in is thinking about it, and this is really my whole dissertation in a nutshell, right? Play that exceeds the bounds of the game, right? So in the case of Ten Candles, this is a rich moment of play that happens, and the game is over, but somehow play keeps happening, right? And finding those moments where play exceeds the game is so important for me because it is about finding ways to like live in unlivable circumstances. I say that as somebody who pursuing a PhD in the state of Florida, as a trans woman has meant a lot of very like real and specific things for me in terms of navigating my own education and the academic job market and everything. This is absolutely something that I'm thinking about. I write a lot about how death as a concept sort of haunts transness. And then a part of this actually comes back to how is play then a liberatory tool for thinking about unraveling broader technical systems. The chapter that follows this one and follows my discussion of emulation then goes on actually to talk about trans folk using movement to crash and break and undermine facial recognition tools, like emulation as a way of breaking other technical systems, not just games. So anyway, very much in conversation with the things I'm thinking about.
For sure. Yeah. No. Oh man. Okay. There's so much I could say. There's so much I
Yeah.
could ask, but we are officially at time. So let's see. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that's all we've got time for right now.
Okay. Yeah.
So, this has been a wonderful talk from a wonderful presenter, and
Thank you all for having me.
yeah, thank you for being here, and
Of
thank all
course.
of you for joining us today for this talk. This has been the Games and Gaming Roundtables webinar series, and we hope to see you soon. Thanks so much.